Imagine being thousands of miles away from someone you love, knowing they are finally getting better, but also knowing they are not yet strong enough to stand beside you at one of the most important events your family holds every year. That is the emotional reality behind the latest chapter of the Irwin family story. Robert Irwin and Terri Irwin appeared together at the 2026 Steve Irwin Gala in Las Vegas, but one person was noticeably missing: Bindi Irwin. Her absence immediately raised questions, especially because the event was created to celebrate the legacy of her late father, Steve Irwin. But the real story is not a secret family feud, a dramatic falling out, or some hidden scandal. It is much more personal. Bindi has been recovering from a serious and painful battle with endometriosis, and her family has been making difficult decisions about what she can handle. When Terri and Robert spoke publicly about her condition, their words revealed just how deeply this journey has affected all of them. The Steve Irwin Gala is not an ordinary celebrity event for the Irwin family. It is closely connected to the conservation mission Steve built during his lifetime. The official gala organization describes the event as a celebration of Steve's passion for family, conservation, and fun, with proceeds supporting wildlife conservation projects and the work of wildlife warriors. The 2026 Las Vegas Gala was held at the Bellagio on May 2nd, and the event brought Terri and Robert together to continue representing that mission. For fans watching from the outside, however, the emotional center of the evening was not simply the gala itself. It was Bindi. She had missed the event the previous year because of an unexpected medical emergency, and in 2026 she was again unable to make the trip. That naturally made people wonder whether something had become worse. But Terri's public explanation was actually more reassuring than alarming. She said Bindi was doing much better, while explaining that extensive travel was still challenging for her at that point. Terri also expressed confidence that Bindi would return for the following year's celebration. That distinction is important because internet headlines can easily turn a health update into something much more frightening than what was actually said. There is no reliable evidence that Bindi was secretly hospitalized in 2026, that she had suffered a new catastrophic medical event, or that Terri and Robert were breaking down because of a hidden family crisis. The verified story is about recovery, patience, and a family choosing not to push someone who is still rebuilding her strength. And considering everything Bindi has already been through, that decision makes sense. Bindi first publicly revealed her endometriosis diagnosis in 2023 after describing years of debilitating symptoms, medical appointments, scans, and uncertainty. She explained that she had spent roughly a decade trying to understand what was happening to her body. Her first major surgery involved the removal of 37 endometriosis lesions and a cyst. The experience changed the way she talked about health publicly because she wanted other people experiencing similar symptoms to know they were not imagining their pain. Then came another major setback in 2025. Bindi was expected to attend the Steve Irwin Gala in Las Vegas, but an unexpected medical emergency changed everything. She underwent surgery after doctors determined that her appendix needed to be removed. During that procedure, doctors also removed 14 new endometriosis lesions and repaired a hernia. Bindi later spoke to her followers from her hospital bed, explaining that she was recovering and thanking the people who had supported her. The numbers alone show why this has not been a simple story of having one operation and immediately returning to normal life. Her surgeries over the following years resulted in more than 50 endometriosis lesions being removed, along with the treatment of a cyst, an appendectomy, and a hernia repair. In March 2026, Bindi spoke more openly about the scale of what she had experienced, explaining that the condition had profoundly affected her quality of life. That context makes the 2026 gala absence much easier to understand. For someone recovering from chronic pain and significant surgery, international travel can be physically demanding even when they appear healthy from the outside. A person can be smiling, working, caring for family, and still need to carefully manage energy and recovery. Bindi's decision not to travel does not automatically mean that she is getting worse. In this case, her family's public comments suggested the opposite. She was improving, but still needed time. Robert's role in all of this is especially meaningful because he knows what it is like to watch someone he loves struggle while the public is watching. He has grown up in a family where personal life and public expectations often overlap. His father became an international television icon. His mother became the person responsible for carrying the family forward after Steve's death, and both Robert and Bindi eventually stepped into the conservation world themselves. Robert has also recently experienced an extraordinary moment of his own. In 2025, he competed on the American version of Dancing with the Stars and ultimately won the season alongside professional partner Whitney Carson. The victory was significant not only because Robert had entered the competition as a conservationist rather than a professional performer, but because it connected him to Bindi's own history on the same show. Bindi had won her season in 2015, meaning that the siblings became champions a decade apart. But Robert's time on the dance floor was about much more than winning a trophy. During the season, he publicly dedicated a performance to his mother, Terri. He spoke about how much she had done for him and Bindi after Steve's death. Robert was only 2 years old when his father died in 2006. So much of his understanding of Steve has been shaped by memories, stories, photographs, and the life his mother built for their family afterward. That is one reason emotional moments involving Robert and Terri can feel so powerful to longtime viewers. Their relationship is not simply that of a famous mother and famous son. They have shared a life shaped by extraordinary grief and responsibility. Terri lost her husband. Robert lost his father. Bindi lost her father. Yet the family continued the work Steve had begun, keeping Australia Zoo and their conservation efforts moving forward. Robert's Dancing with the Stars journey brought some of those feelings into the open. His tribute to Terri became one of the season's emotional highlights because he was able to publicly acknowledge something he had probably understood for years. His mother had carried an enormous amount of responsibility while raising 2 children and continuing Steve's conservation mission. The dance gave him a chance to express gratitude in a way that ordinary family conversations sometimes cannot. And then there was Bindi's connection to the same experience. Her earlier victory on Dancing with the Stars had already become an important part of the family story. When Robert later followed her path, the achievement became something the siblings could share even though they had competed a decade apart. For Robert, his sister's encouragement was part of the emotional foundation behind his own journey. So when the family reached another Steve Irwin gala, Bindi's absence naturally carried emotional weight. But it is important not to confuse emotional weight with evidence of a new crisis. Sometimes a family can feel sadness simply because someone they love cannot be there. A chair being empty at an important family occasion can remind people of everything they have experienced together. There is also another layer to this story: Steve himself. In February 2026, Terri, Bindi, and Robert each publicly remembered Steve on what would have been his 64th birthday. Their tributes reflected the different ways each family member carries his memory. Bindi shared a touching connection between Steve and her daughter Grace, while Robert reflected on his father's influence. Terri focused on continuing the conservation mission that Steve cared so deeply about. For Bindi, grief has always been complicated by the fact that she was a child when her father died. She has spent her entire adult life learning how to carry a public legacy that began before she was old enough to fully understand what it would mean. Now she is also a mother herself, which can change the way a person remembers their own childhood. Her daughter Grace has become part of that story. Bindi has spoken publicly about how Grace refers to Steve as her guardian angel. That does not erase the sadness of losing him, but it gives the family another way of connecting generations. Steve never met his granddaughter, yet his influence continues through the work Bindi and Robert do and through the stories they tell about him. That may also help explain why the Irwins can appear emotional when talking about Bindi. Her health journey is not happening in isolation. It is happening inside a family that has already experienced sudden loss and enormous public pressure. When someone in the family faces a prolonged medical struggle, the people around them can experience their own mixture of fear, helplessness, relief, and hope. Terri, in particular, has spent years watching her children grow into adults while protecting them from unnecessary pressure. She has also had to balance public expectations with private family decisions. When Bindi became ill, Terri could not simply solve the problem. She could support her daughter, but the medical decisions had to be made by Bindi and her doctors. That is why Terri's 2026 statement is more meaningful than a dramatic headline might suggest. She did not announce a new catastrophe. She offered reassurance, while acknowledging that recovery has limits. She said Bindi was doing much better, but that travel was still difficult. That is a message of cautious optimism, not despair. Robert's comments fit the same picture. Instead of treating Bindi's absence as a failure, he emphasized her continued contribution to the family's work. Bindi remains connected to Australia Zoo and the conservation mission even when she cannot physically travel to every event. The zoo and wildlife warriors are larger than any single gala appearance, and the family's goal is ultimately to protect wildlife rather than maintain a perfect public image. This is especially important because Bindi's health advocacy has become one of the most significant parts of her public life. By speaking openly about endometriosis, she has helped bring attention to a condition that can take years to diagnose and can seriously affect daily life. Her story is personal, but the larger message is about listening to your body and seeking appropriate medical care. There is no need to exaggerate her condition to make that story powerful. The facts are already powerful enough. Years of unexplained symptoms, major surgery, a recurrence of endometriosis, another operation, more than 50 lesions removed across procedures, recovery that required patience, and a family learning that getting better does not always mean returning immediately to everything you used to do. Perhaps the most emotional part is that Bindi has continued to work toward normal life. Her recovery is not defined only by hospitals and surgery. It is also defined by being a mother, spending time with Grace, participating in conservation, and gradually rebuilding the ability to enjoy ordinary moments without the constant fear of debilitating pain. That is why the phrase, "what really happened," deserves a careful answer. What happened is not that Robert and Terri discovered some shocking secret about Bindi. What happened is that a family already familiar with loss was forced to confront another kind of vulnerability. Bindi became sick, sought treatment, underwent major procedures, and is now recovering. Her mother and brother are supporting her while respecting the pace of that recovery. And there is something else worth remembering. Celebrity families often have very little control over the stories written about them. A photograph of someone looking sad can become evidence of a feud. An empty seat can become a rumor. A health update can become a prediction of disaster. But none of those things automatically represent reality. In fact, the Irwin family has recently had to push back against exactly this kind of speculation. Robert publicly criticized attempts to portray his mother negatively and urged people not to manufacture family drama where there was none. A recent report noted that a photograph of Robert looking somber had been interpreted as evidence of family problems. But Robert explained that his sadness was actually connected to the death of a longtime pet chicken. That detail may seem unrelated, but it demonstrates the larger problem. People see a few seconds of a celebrity's life and attempt to construct an entire story around them. The Irwins have repeatedly emphasized family, conservation, and positivity. So sensational claims about secret conflict should be treated carefully unless there is reliable evidence. The tears associated with this family are real, but they do not necessarily represent scandal. Sometimes tears are simply grief. Sometimes they are relief. Sometimes they are pride. And sometimes they are the emotional release that comes when a family realizes how far it has traveled together. Robert's recent success is a perfect example. Winning Dancing with the Stars could have been simply a television achievement. Instead, it became a tribute to his mother, a connection to his sister, and another way of honoring his father. For Terri, watching her son succeed must have carried memories of the little boy she raised after losing Steve. For Bindi, meanwhile, the greatest victory may be something much quieter, feeling more like herself again. Her public health updates have focused on the possibility of living without the constant, overwhelming pain that once dominated her daily life. That kind of progress may not create the same headlines as a Mirrorball trophy, but for someone who has spent years struggling with chronic illness, it can be far more meaningful. And the family has not abandoned the larger mission. The official Steve Irwin Gala continues to raise money for conservation work, wildlife treatment, habitat protection, and efforts against threats facing vulnerable species. The organization describes these events as a way to keep Steve's passion alive through practical conservation work. That may ultimately be the strongest answer to every emotional moment surrounding the Irwins. Steve is gone, but the mission did not disappear. Terri continued it. Bindi continued it. Robert continued it. And now Grace is growing up surrounded by the same animals, stories, and conservation values. So if you saw a headline suggesting that Robert and Terri completely broke down because something terrible had happened to Bindi, the reality is more nuanced. There is genuine emotion surrounding Bindi's health, and there is understandable concern within the family. But the publicly verified information points toward recovery rather than a new catastrophe. Bindi was not simply forgotten because she missed the gala. She was being given space to heal. Terri and Robert were not publicly announcing a secret family disaster. They were explaining why someone they love could not make a demanding international trip. And rather than pressuring her to appear for the cameras, they accepted that her health had to come first. That may be one of the most important lessons in this entire story. For a family that has spent decades in front of cameras, sometimes the most powerful decision is to step away from them. The Irwins have built a public identity around courage, energy, and adventure. Steve famously lived life at full speed. Robert has inherited that enthusiasm. Bindi has spent years carrying the family conservation message. Terri has held the family together through extraordinary circumstances. But courage does not mean pretending everything is easy. Sometimes courage means admitting that you are tired. Sometimes it means missing an important event. Sometimes it means undergoing another medical procedure. And sometimes it means allowing your family to speak for you while you stay home and recover. As of the latest reliable reports, that is where Bindi's story stands. Her family says she is doing much better, but she is still being careful about travel. She continues to be involved in the conservation world, while her family remains hopeful that she will be able to return to the gala in the future. There is no confirmed evidence that she is facing some undisclosed tragedy beyond the health challenges she has already discussed publicly. There is no verified evidence of a secret feud between Bindi, Robert, and Terri. And there is no reason to turn a family's difficult health journey into something darker than the facts support. What we can say is that the Irwins have been through an extraordinary amount together. They lost Steve suddenly. They rebuilt their family. They continued his conservation mission. They watched Bindi fight a painful chronic condition. They watched Robert step into a new chapter of his own career. And through all of it, they have continued to show up for one another. Maybe that is why moments involving them can feel so emotional. Behind the television appearances, trophies, gala photographs, and conservation headlines is a family that has spent 20 years learning how to live with both grief and hope. Bindi's absence from the gala was not the ending of her story. It was simply another reminder that healing does not follow a schedule. And perhaps the most hopeful part is that Terri did not speak as though her daughter had disappeared from the family's future. Quite the opposite. She spoke about Bindi returning when she is ready. Robert spoke about her contributions. The family continued honoring Steve while leaving room for Bindi to recover at her own pace. So the next time you see a dramatic headline about the Irwin family, it is worth looking beyond the words designed to make you click. The real story may be quieter, but it can also be more meaningful. This is a story about a daughter fighting to regain her health, a mother protecting her child, a brother standing beside his sister,